My name is Rowan Snyder. I'm 38 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood exactly where I stood in my family. I live just outside Portland, Oregon. I'm a data analyst by profession. Quiet work, structured work, the kind of job where patterns matter more than noise. People often assume that says everything about me. Organized, logical, safe, the dependable middle daughter in a family of 5 siblings. The one who remembers birthdays, mediates arguments, and never raises her voice. Growing up, I was the easy one, not the brilliant prodigy like my older brother, not the dramatic free spirit like my younger sisters, not the fragile one, not the difficult one. I was the steady, predictable, the background harmony in a louder song. If you had asked anyone in my family to describe me, they would have said something kind but dismissive. Rowan's strong. Rowan doesn't need much. Rowan's always fine. And maybe I believe that too. This story isn't about revenge. It isn't about exposing anyone publicly or tearing down the people who raised me. It's about something quieter, something that began with a question I couldn't unask. It started the year my father passed away. Grief does strange things to memory. It rearranges conversations. It sharpens certain comments that once felt harmless. A joke at Thanksgiving, a look exchanged across a room, a sentence that lands differently when you replay it 10 years later. For me, the shift began with paperwork, estate documents, old medical records, small inconsistencies that most people would overlook. But I don't overlook inconsistencies. It's what I do for a living. One decision led to another. One private test became several. And before I fully understood what I was stepping into, I had secretly had DNA tests done on my entire family. I told myself it was about medical clarity, about genealogy, about understanding risk factors. That was only half true. The results revealed a hidden truth that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Not in a loud, explosive way, in a quiet, irreversible one. Over the next hour, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, how I was perceived, what I discovered, what I chose to do with that knowledge, and why silence can be more powerful than confrontation. I won't exaggerate. I won't dramatize. I'll simply tell you what I learned about identity, loyalty, and the cost of believing you know where you belong. Have you ever felt certain about your place in a story, only to realize you were reading the wrong version all along? In my family, identity was assigned early. Ethan was the genius. Clara was the sensitive one. Marcus was the rebel. Twins Lily and Nora were the miracles. And me? I was the steady one. It sounds flattering. It's meant to be. But steady is a role that quietly absorbs everything without ever being centered. At family gatherings, I was the one refilling glasses before anyone asked. I arrived early to help my mother cook. I stayed late to wash dishes. When tensions rose, as they always did in a house full of strong personalities, I translated everyone's emotions into something manageable. Ethan didn't mean it like that. Marcus is just stressed. Claire's been overwhelmed lately. I spoke for people who rarely spoke for me. No one asked how I felt about anything important. Not maliciously, just habitually. If I didn't protest, they assumed I agreed. If I didn't complain, they assumed I was fine. And I rarely protested. When I got accepted into a competitive analytics program in Chicago, my father smiled and said, "You'll always land on your feet." Then he turned to congratulate Ethan on a promotion. When I bought my first condo, my mother said, "That's practical, Rowan. Practical. Not impressive, not brave, practical." Even when I ended a 7-year relationship, something that shattered me quietly, my family described it as very mature of you, as if heartbreak were another administrative task I'd handled efficiently. They weren't cruel. That's the complicated part. They loved me in the way you love infrastructure. You don't admire the foundation of a house every day. You just assume it will hold. I became excellent at holding. Over time, invisibility shapes you. You learn to listen more than you speak. You observe patterns. You notice who interrupts whom. You notice which stories get repeated and which are forgotten. I noticed that family stories about my childhood were often vague. There were detailed memories of Ethan's science fair wins, Clara's first recital, Marcus's suspension in 10th grade. My early years were summarized in broad strokes. Rowan was such an easy baby. Rowan never cried. Rowan practically raised herself. It was always said with admiration, but sometimes I wondered what it meant. When relatives commented that I didn't really look like the others, my mother would laugh lightly. Genetics are funny. The subject would change. I learned not to linger on it. The twins had my father's eyes. Ethan had his build. Clara and Marcus shared my mother's smile. I was told I had my grandmother's coloring. That explanation floated for years without friction, until it didn't. After my father's funeral, we gathered in the living room, sorting through old photo albums. There was wine, nostalgia, stories looping in familiar circles. I flipped through pages slowly, studying the chronology. Hospital photos, birthdays, vacation. I noticed something small, a gap. My birth announcement photo looked different from the others. Different hospital backdrop. Different handwriting on the card tape beside it. Probably nothing. But data doesn't ignore probably nothing. Later that night, when everyone had left, I took my father's old filing box home to help organize paperwork for my mother. Inside were medical forms, insurance documents, blood type records. And that's when I saw it. My blood type didn't align cleanly with my parents'. It wasn't impossible, just statistically unusual. Most people would have shrugged. I didn't. I was still the steady one. I just started asking questions silently, and no one noticed. The first cut wasn't dramatic. There was no argument, no accusation, no late-night confession. It was a comment. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered again. This time at my mother's house to divide smaller personal items. Jewelry, books, old keepsakes that somehow felt heavier than furniture. Ethan was reviewing legal documents at the dining table. Clara and the twins were sorting through photo albums. Marcus leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. I was at the sink, rinsing dust from a stack of old glass frames. I remember it clearly because of how ordinary it was, Marcus said, almost casually. Well, at least we know Dad's medical history inside out. Except maybe Rowan. He smirked slightly. You've always been kind of genetically mysterious. The room laughed, not cruelly, lightly, like it was an old joke I had somehow missed. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly. What does that mean? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Clara waved a hand dismissively. Oh, nothing. Just that you don't look like any of us. You've always been the outlier. Mom used to joke you were switched at birth, one of the twins added, smiling as if sharing something adorable. My mother didn't laugh this time. She just adjusted the stack of envelopes in front of her. It was a joke, she said too quickly. No one seemed uncomfortable except me. I smiled. Because that's what I did. Because in that room, I was the steady one. But something about the phrasing lingered. Genetically mysterious. It wasn't the first time I'd heard variations of it. But grief has a way of stripping humor from things that once felt harmless. On the drive home, I replayed the moment in my head. The laugh, my mother's silence, the speed at which she redirected the conversation. In data analysis, when multiple small anomalies cluster around the same variable, you flag it. That night, I logged into a consumer DNA testing site. At first, I told myself it was for health reasons. My father had died of a cardiac event that seemed sudden. Knowing more about hereditary risk made sense. I ordered a kit for myself, just mine. When the box arrived, I placed it on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. The packaging was clean, clinical, innocent. Spit in a tube, seal it, mail it back. It felt absurd that something so small could answer questions I had never dared to articulate. Before sealing the envelope, I hesitated. What exactly was I hoping to find? Proof I belonged, or proof I didn't? I mailed it anyway. Weeks passed. Life resumed its rhythm. Work deadlines, grocery lists, weekly calls with my mother. No one mentioned the genetically mysterious comment again, and I didn't either. When the email notification arrived, your DNA results are ready, I was at my desk during lunch. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't panic. I simply closed my office door. I clicked. The screen loaded slowly, as if giving me one final opportunity to remain who I had always been. The ethnicity breakdown wasn't surprising. The real information was lower. Parent-child genetic match predictions, a simple probability percentage. It didn't say what I expected. It didn't say what it should have said. And in that moment, I understood something quietly devastating. The joke in the kitchen hadn't been random. It had been rehearsed. And I was the only one who didn't know the script. I didn't cry. I opened a spreadsheet. When you grow up being the easy one, you develop a dangerous skill. You learn how to rationalize. The probability percentage on that screen didn't scream. It didn't flash red. It simply suggested that one of my assumed biological relationships was statistically inconsistent. Not impossible, just unlikely. I told myself it could be an error. Consumer DNA tests weren't perfect. Databases varied, algorithms updated. I minimized the window. For 3 days, I didn't open it again. Instead, I replayed childhood moments through a new filter. Family jokes I'd absorbed without analysis. Rowan marches to her own genetic drum. She must have inherited that from some distant ancestor. Are you sure she's ours? Whisks followed by laughter. I had always laughed too, because objecting would have felt dramatic, and I was never dramatic. But when you lay enough small dismissals side by side, they stop looking accidental. They start looking structural. I began noticing how often I was the neutral party in conflicts, the one whose opinion carried no weight because it was assumed to be accommodating. When Ethan wanted to adjust the division of Dad's tools, he asked Marcus. When Clara wanted advice about selling inherited jewelry, she called the twins. When Mom needed someone to update her insurance forms, she called me. I handled logistics. They handled legacy. Even after the DNA result, I continued participating normally. I attended Sunday dinners. I listened to family group chats, buzzing with shared childhood memories that felt slightly off-center now. One evening, the twins were reminiscing about being born prematurely and how Dad had never left the hospital. Except when Rowan was born, Marcus said casually. I think he was on a work trip then, right? Silence. A half second too long. My mother cleared her throat. It was complicated. Then Clara laughed lightly. See, mysterious. They didn't look at me when they said it. They didn't need to, because I had never pushed back before. Invisibility becomes permission. If you never claim space, people assume you don't need it. I started documenting everything, not conversations in a paranoid way, but timelines, dates, hospital records, travel logs from old tax documents I'd taken home to help my mother organize. Patterns began emerging. My father had indeed been traveling the week of my birth. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the length of the trip and the lack of hospital billing statements in his files connected to my delivery. Every other sibling had a neat folder: insurance claims, pediatrician receipts, vaccination records. Mine were thinner. I told myself again, maybe Mom kept them separately. Maybe the paperwork was lost. Maybe I was constructing a narrative from fragments. But the more I tried to normalize the inconsistencies, the louder they felt. The real shift wasn't the data. It was my emotional recalibration. For the first time, I stopped trying to defend them in my own head. I stopped saying, they didn't mean it. Intent matters, but impact accumulates. The family had always treated my differences as charming anomalies. What if they weren't anomalies? What if they were evidence? I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I scheduled a quiet lunch with my mother. Not to accuse, just to observe. If there was a truth here, it wasn't going to reveal itself through confrontation. It would reveal itself in the way everything else had in my life, through patience, through silence, through watching who flinched first. And for the first time in 38 years, I stopped trying to be the easy one. The lunch with my mother was held at a quiet cafe she liked. Linen napkins, soft jazz, the kind of place where conversations stayed low and polite. She arrived 5 minutes early. She always did. We ordered soup, something simple, something safe. For the first 15 minutes, we spoke about neutral things. Her garden, the neighbor's new fence, a recipe she wanted to try. I watched her hands as she spoke. My mother's tone had always been subtle. A tightening of her fingers around a cup, a pause that was just slightly too long. Finally, I said it gently. I ran one of those DNA health panels after Dad's heart attack, just to understand risk factors. Her spoon paused midair. That's thorough, she said carefully. I thought it would be responsible. She nodded. Too many times, I noticed something interesting, I continued, keeping my voice even. My blood type and the parental match probabilities. They're statistically unusual. Not accusatory, just factual. My mother placed the spoon down with precision. The kind you use when you don't want porcelain to make noise. Those tests can be inaccurate, she replied immediately. You can't trust everything online. I know, I said. That's why I double-checked the hospital records. Or tried to. There it was. A flicker. Not shocked. Not anger. Recognition. She looked at me the way someone looks at a door they've been hoping would stay closed. Rowan, she said softly, you've always had such a vivid imagination. That was the role. There it was in full shape. Not the steady one. Not the easy one. The overthinking one. The analytical one who reads too much into things. I almost smiled at the symmetry. My entire life I had been praised for being rational, logical, grounded. But the moment logic turned inward, toward the family narrative, it became imagination. I let the silence stretch. You don't have to protect me from anything, I said finally. She exhaled slowly. There are things, she began, then stopped. There are things that don't matter anymore. That sentence told me everything. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. In that moment, I understood the deeper structure of my role in this family. I wasn't just the steady one. I was the stabilizer of secrets. The one least likely to make noise. The safest to leave in partial darkness. It wasn't cruelty. It was calculus. If there was a story that required containment, I was statistically the least disruptive container. I finished my soup. I'm not looking for drama, I said quietly, just clarity. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her grip was warm, familiar. You are my daughter, she said. Present tense, precise. Not you have always been. Not you were born. Just, you are. Language matters. When we left the cafe, she hugged me longer than usual. Not tight, not desperate. Measured, as if holding something in place. On the drive home, I didn't feel angry. I felt aligned. For the first time, I saw the architecture of the family clearly. And once you see architecture, you stop walking into walls pretending they're invisible. They had assigned me a role. Reliable, useful, contained. What they didn't realize was that containment works both ways. If I could hold their secrets quietly, I could uncover them the same way. The shift didn't happen at the cafe. It happened 3 nights later, alone in my condo, sitting on the floor with my father's filing box open beside me. The house was quiet in that specific way only late evenings are. The refrigerator is humming. The faint ticking of the hallway clock, ordinary sounds that feel amplified when your internal world is rearranging itself. I had pulled every document related to my birth. Insurance claims, hospital billing codes, old tax returns, travel receipts. I wasn't looking for a scandal. I was looking for continuity. Instead, I found absence. There were invoices for Ethan's delivery, detailed pediatric notes for Clara. Even Marcus's emergency appendectomy records were preserved in careful plastic sleeves. For me, there was a single hospital discharge summary. No billing trail, no attending physician's signature matched the others. No record of my father's insurance being billed that week. Just a document that felt administratively sufficient. I sat back against the couch and closed my eyes. For most of my life, I had operated under a simple assumption. If something was unclear, I would gather more data. Eventually, clarity would emerge. But that night, clarity wasn't arriving through addition. It was arriving through subtraction. What if the missing pieces weren't lost? What if they were intentionally sparse? I opened my laptop and rechecked the DNA platform. This time, I clicked deeper into shared matches. There were dozens of distant cousins connected to my siblings. I shared only a fraction of them. And then there were several names I didn't recognize at all. Clusters that connected to me, but not to any of the others. The probability wasn't ambiguous anymore. It was directional. My chest felt tight, but not panicked. I realized something subtle in that moment. I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was afraid of what staying silent about it would cost me. For years, I had absorbed the family narrative without editing it. I had allowed myself to be positioned as peripheral because I believed it was accidental. But if my difference had been known, if the jokes had roots, then my invisibility wasn't organic. It was protective. Protective of whom? I stood and walked to the mirror in the hallway. I studied my face the way you study a photograph for metadata. The shape of my eyes, the slope of my shoulders, the absence of familiar resemblance I had always politely dismissed. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt recalibrated. There's a quiet kind of power that comes when confusion turns into direction. Not clear yet, just direction. Instead of spiraling into confrontation, I did something else. I ordered 4 additional DNA kits, not impulsively, deliberately. If there was a truth here, it wasn't going to remain asymmetrical. I needed a full comparison. I justified it easily. Holiday gifts. Let's explore our ancestry together. It would sound charming, modern, harmless. The irony almost made me smile. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to the role they'd assigned me. I was stepping outside of it. Silence, I realize, is only weakness when it's unconscious. When it's chosen, it becomes positioning. I packed the filing box neatly and slid it back under my desk. Nothing about my demeanor changed the next time I saw my family. I laughed at the same jokes. I helped my mother reorganize the pantry. I listened to Ethan talk about investments. But internally, something irreversible had shifted. I was no longer trying to prove I belonged. I was preparing to understand why I might not. And once you stop seeking permission to exist in a narrative, you become the author of it. The DNA kits arrived in identical white boxes. Minimal, unassuming, almost elegant. I placed them on my dining table and stared at them for a long time. Not because I doubted what I was doing, but because I understood exactly what it meant. This was the moment silence changed form. Until now, my quiet had been reflexive, a habit shaped by years of being the steady one. I stayed silent because conflict felt inefficient, because harmony felt responsible. But this was different. This silence had intention. At Sunday dinner, I brought the boxes in a canvas tote bag. I thought it would be fun, I said casually, placing them on the kitchen counter. An ancestry thing. We've never really mapped out our background properly. The twins were immediately enthusiastic. Oh my god, yes, Lily said. I've always wanted to know if we're secretly Scandinavian royalty. Marcus laughed. Rowan, you and your data projects. Ethan inspected the box like a product review. These are actually pretty accurate now. My mother's smile was the only one that didn't fully reach her eyes. That seems unnecessary, she said lightly. We know who we are. It was the first resistance. Soft, controlled, but present. I kept my tone neutral. It's just for fun and health markers. After Dad, I let the sentence trail off deliberately. Grief was a persuasive anchor. Clara squeezed my shoulder. I think it's sweet, like a family science experiment. They each took a kit, even my mother. That part surprised me. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before picking it up, but she didn't refuse. Refusal would have been louder than compliance. Over the next week, I followed up gently. Don't forget to mail it. Results take about 3 weeks. Make sure you register the kit number. No one questioned my enthusiasm, because I had always been the organized one. If I initiated something structured, it was assumed to be harmless. That was the power of long-term perception. It builds trust that can carry almost anything. When the confirmation emails began arriving, one by one, I created a private folder on my laptop. I didn't open any of the results immediately. That was the hardest part. Waiting, not because I feared the outcome, but because once opened, the information would exist in a new state. Undeniable, documented, shared between databases so that you don't forget. During that waiting period, something interesting happened. I became more observant than ever. My mother called me twice that week, not about the test directly, just checking in. Have you heard anything yet? She asked on the second call, her voice deliberately casual. Not yet, I said. These things take time. Silence hung there. You know, she added, families are built on more than biology. There it was again. Directional language. I didn't respond immediately. I agree, I said finally. And I meant it. But agreement and ignorance are not the same thing. At work, I found myself calmer than usual. Focused. Precise. It's strange how certainty, no matter how destabilizing, can sharpen you. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't angry. I was aligning facts. And the more I aligned them, the more I understood something critical. If there was a truth being protected, it wasn't being protected from harm. It was being protected from disruption. I had always been the least disruptive member of the family, which meant I had been the safest one to exclude from the full narrative. Silence had been my assigned trait. Now it was my strategy. The night the final result notification arrived, I didn't open it immediately. I made tea. I sat at my desk. I picked up my silver mechanical pencil and rolled it between my fingers. Then I clicked. When you work with data long enough, you learn something essential. Raw information means nothing without structure. So I didn't react when I opened the first set of results. I built a comparison grid, sibling by sibling, shared DNA percentages, predicted relationships, overlapping relative clusters, maternal matches, paternal matches. I created columns for statistical probability and variance ranges. I color-coded inconsistencies. I noted patterns without assigning emotional meaning to them. The twins' results aligned exactly as expected. Full siblings to each other, consistent parent-child matches to both mom and dad. Ethan and Clara matched cleanly too. Marcus had minor percentage variations, but nothing outside normal fluctuation. And then there was mine. I matched my mother within expected parameters. I did not match my father as a biological child. The probability wasn't ambiguous anymore. It was definitive, but that wasn't the full revelation. What changed everything was the cross-sibling comparison. I was genetically half related to Ethan and Clara. Not fully, half, which meant the truth wasn't that I was unrelated. It was more complex than that. I wasn't an outsider. I was a variable. The quiet foundation of my identity didn't collapse in that moment. It reassembled. My father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who drove me to debate tournaments, who once sat through an entire orchestra rehearsal just to hear me play 4 minutes of second violin, was not my biological father. But my mother was still my mother, and my siblings were still my siblings. Just not in the proportions I had believed. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the wall. This wasn't a scandal. This was architecture. There are secrets born from shame. There are secrets born from protection. And there are secrets born from timing. The timeline began aligning quickly in my head. My birth year, my father's extended business trip, the sparse hospital documentation, the rehearsed jokes, my mother's careful language. I opened the shared relative clusters attached to my DNA profile. There were repeated surnames, geographic concentrations, a particular branch of extended relatives connected to one individual I didn't recognize. A man, mid-60s, living 3 states away, marked as a high probability paternal match. I didn't click his profile immediately. Instead, I did what they never expected of me. I documented everything. I downloaded raw data files. I cross-referenced with public genealogy databases. I confirmed consistency across platforms. No anomalies, no testing errors, no algorithmic glitches. Just truth. And the most unsettling part? No one in my family reached out to discuss their results. Not one sibling texted, "Hey, mine came back. Did you see yours?" It was as if they were collectively avoiding eye contact with something invisible in the room. Except I wasn't avoiding it. I was mapping it. Over the next few days, I observed subtle shifts. My mother seemed quieter during phone calls. Ethan, usually quick to share analytics about everything, didn't mention percentages or ancestry breakdowns. Marcus made one offhand joke in the group chat. Guess we're less exotic than we hoped. The twins posted about their results on social media, but no one asked about mine. That silence was louder than any confrontation. They weren't surprised, which meant this wasn't new information to them. Maybe not all of them, but someone had known. I returned to the paternal match profile late one evening. His name was Daniel Mercer. The projected relationship, 99.7% probability of parent-child. Not uncle, not cousin, parent. I studied his public photos carefully. The shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he smiled was slightly off-center. I saw echoes, not a dramatic resemblance, but statistical familiarity. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Curiosity about who I was outside the framework I'd been given. I didn't message him. Not yet. Because this wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about understanding the origin. And understanding the origin is power. The family had assigned me the role of stable constant. What they never noticed was that constants can analyze variables without being seen. They assumed my quiet meant compliance. They never considered it might mean patience. By the end of that week, I had something more valuable than outrage. I had confirmation. And confirmation doesn't need volume. It needs direction. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while. Not grieving, not celebrating, just integrating. The truth hadn't shattered me. It had clarified for me. And clarity, when handled carefully, is leverage. I didn't tell anyone when I confirmed it. Not my siblings, not my mother, not even a close friend. The revelation stayed where most powerful things begin, quietly inside me. For 3 days, I moved through my routines as if nothing had changed. I answered work emails. I attended a quarterly budget review. I met Clara for coffee and listened to her talk about redecorating her living room. And all the while, a new understanding sat calmly behind my eyes. Daniel Mercer, 99.7% probability, biological father. The word felt clinical, almost sterile. It didn't carry the emotional weight that Dad did. My father, the man who raised me, was still Dad in my mind. That didn't shift. What shifted was context. On the 4th night, I opened Daniel's profile again. This time, I allowed myself to look beyond the genetic percentages. Public records, employment history, an old alumni newsletter, a LinkedIn page that hadn't been updated in years. He had lived in Portland for a short period, 39 years ago. The same year I was born. There it was, the point where timelines intersected. I zoomed in on a photograph from an archived community event. He was standing beside a banner for a nonprofit fundraiser. The image quality was grainy, but something about his posture felt familiar. Not identical, just aligned. I studied his eyes. I've always believed that eyes are less about appearance and more about intent. The way someone holds their gaze tells you what kind of silence they carry. His eyes weren't loud, they were measured. I closed the tab. This wasn't about fantasy. It wasn't about imagining an alternate life. It wasn't about searching for a replacement parent. It was about ownership of narrative. For years, I had been the mysterious one, the genetic anomaly, the unspoken joke. But now I understand something deeper. The family hadn't treated me as different because I felt different. They treated me as different because they knew I was. Even if they never said it directly, the rehearsed jokes, the protective language, the subtle distancing during childhood stories, they weren't random. They were containment strategies. And containment, when maintained long enough, becomes normalized. I thought about my mother's words at the cafe. "You are my daughter." Present tense, she had chosen phrasing carefully. Not deception, precision. I didn't feel hatred toward her. I didn't even feel anger. I felt the weight of a decision she must have made decades ago. a decision to protect a marriage, or reputation, or stability. Maybe all three. But in protecting that structure, she had quietly adjusted my place within it. The private reveal wasn't explosive. It was sobering. Because once you know the truth, you have options. And options are responsibility. I opened a blank document and wrote 3 headings. 1. Confront immediately. 2. Say nothing. Carry it alone. 3. Confirm externally before speaking. I didn't rush. I listed consequences under each one: emotional impact, family stability, long-term integrity. For the first time, I wasn't reacting as the easy one. I was evaluating myself. The most surprising emotion wasn't betrayal. It was relief. Relief that my lifelong sense of being slightly out of alignment wasn't imagined. Relief that the data validated the intuition I had buried for decades. Relief that my quiet observation hadn't been paranoia. It had been a perception. I walked to the mirror again that night. This time, I didn't search for resemblance. I searched for ownership. My face looked the same, but my posture had shifted. There is a specific kind of strength that arrives when you no longer need validation from the people who shaped you. I wasn't looking to expose anyone. I was looking to reposition myself within the truth. The private reveal didn't make me louder. It made me steadier. Because now I wasn't standing on assumptions. I was standing on evidence. And evidence doesn't require permission. Knowing the truth is one thing. Deciding what to do with it is another. For several days, I let the information settle. Not because I was uncertain, but because I understood the weight of irreversible choices. You can't unknow biological data. You can't unopen conversations once they begin. And you can't restore innocence to a narrative after it's been revised. I returned to the document with my 3 options. 1. Confront immediately. There was an appeal to that. Clean, direct. Sit my mother down and place the results on the table between us like coordinates on a map. But confrontation is rarely about information. It's about timing. And I wasn't convinced this was the right timing. My father had only recently passed. My mother was grieving. The twins were planning a joint move. Ethan was navigating a company merger. Explosions during instability don't produce clarity. They produce collateral damage. 2. Say nothing. Carry it alone. This option was tempting in a different way. It preserved peace. It protected my mother from having to explain something she had buried for decades. But silence, permanent silence, would anchor me back into the old role. The steady one, the absorber, the container of discomfort. I had outgrown that position. 3. Confirm externally before speaking. This option felt the most deliberate, not because I doubted the science. The probability was clear. But because identity deserves verification beyond a dashboard. If Daniel Mercer was my biological father, he was a person, not just a percentage. And if I was going to alter the emotional architecture of my family, I needed to stand on something stronger than a test result. I closed my laptop and sat with that understanding. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about exposure. It was about alignment. There's a misconception that strength always looks like confrontation, like raised voices or dramatic revelations. But sometimes strength is sequencing, choosing the order in which truths surface. I drafted a message to Daniel 3 times before I saved it. Not accusatory, not emotional, not demanding, just factual. My name is Rowan Snyder. Recent DNA analysis indicates a high probability of biological parentage. I'm not seeking disruption, only clarity. If you're open to a brief conversation, I would appreciate it. I didn't send it immediately. I waited until the next morning, because decisions made at night often carry unnecessary intensity. At 9:12 a.m., after finishing my first cup of coffee, I pressed send. And in that moment, something irreversible shifted. Not because he had responded, but because I had stepped beyond the version of myself that waited for permission. The choice wasn't about exposing my family. It was about honoring myself. Whatever happened next, denial, confirmation, silence, I would no longer be operating from speculation. I would be operating from direct truth. That was the line I crossed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but definitely. I went to work that day as usual, sat through meetings, presented quarterly metrics, answered emails with my typical precision. No one in my office knew that my identity was mid-transition, and no one in my family suspected that the narrative they had carefully maintained for decades was about to face its first external verification. When my phone vibrated at 3:47 p.m., I didn't reach for it immediately. I let it ring once, twice. Then I looked down. Unknown number, Oregon area code. I exhaled slowly and answered. Rowan? His voice was steady, older, controlled in the way someone sounds when they've already processed the information before speaking. Yes. A pause, not confused, not defensive. I received your message. There are moments in life when everything slows, not dramatically, but precisely. Words become measured. Breathing becomes intentional. I wasn't sure you would respond, I said. I wondered if this day would come, he replied. That sentence told me more than any denial could have. We didn't speak for long. 15 minutes, 20 at most. He confirmed that he had known my mother decades ago, that their relationship had been brief but significant, that he had been told, clearly, that the pregnancy was not his responsibility. I was informed that the situation was handled, he said carefully. Handled? Language again. I didn't pursue it, he added. Your mother was married. I made the choice to step back. No bitterness in his voice, just history. I asked him for one thing, a second test, not because I doubted the probability, but because irreversible truths deserve formal confirmation. He agreed without hesitation. We arranged a legal DNA test through a certified lab, not a consumer platform, a documented court-admissible verification, professional, quiet, strategic. I didn't tell my family about the call. Instead, I began preparing in other ways. I requested a certified copy of my birth certificate. I reviewed hospital admission archives. I filed a records request for the attending physician's employment history that year. None of it was aggressive. It was structural. If this truth was going to surface, it would do so cleanly. Weeks passed. The lab appointment was scheduled in 2 separate cities, samples collected, documentation signed. During that waiting period, something subtle began shifting inside me. I stopped volunteering to mediate family disagreements. When Marcus argued with Ethan over estate distribution, I listened, but I didn't translate. When Clara asked for my opinion about selling Dad's watch, I said, "That's your decision." I was still calm, still present, but no longer absorbing. They noticed, not consciously, but the dynamic shifted. Without the stabilizer cushioning every interaction, friction became visible. My mother called me more often. "You've seemed distant lately," she said one evening. "I've been thinking," I replied. "About what?" Identity. Silence. She didn't press, because somewhere inside her, she knew the timeline was narrowing. When the official results arrived, they were delivered via secure portal. 99.9% probability of paternity. Legally definitive. I read the report once. Then again, not searching for an error, just absorbing the permanence. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone immediately. Instead, I printed the document, placed it in a folder, and locked it in my desk drawer. There's a misconception that power is loud when acquired. It isn't. Real power is quiet because it doesn't need a witness to exist. I now held the full truth. Biological fact. Documented. Confirmed. And no one in my family knew that the ground beneath our shared narrative had already shifted. But I wasn't planning an explosion. I was planning positioning. Because once the truth surfaces, reactions are unpredictable. And I intended to be the only one in control of how this unfolded. Silence had carried me this far. Now it was shielding me. The consequences didn't begin with shouting. They began with absence. I stopped attending Sunday dinners. Not dramatically, not with an announcement. I simply declined twice in a row. Work deadline, I texted the first time. Need a quiet weekend, the second. No one argued. They never had to argue with me before. But something subtle shifted in the group chat. Without my steady presence, conversations became shorter, less coordinated. Plans overlapped, details were forgotten. I had been the invisible thread holding small logistics together. When you remove a thread, the fabric doesn't tear immediately. It loosens. Marcus called me midweek. "Everything okay?" he asked, casual but probing. "Yes," I said. "Why wouldn't it be? You just seem less involved." Less involved. I almost smiled. "For the first time in years," I replied gently. "I'm just focusing on myself." He didn't know how to respond to that, because I had never claimed that space before. Meanwhile, I scheduled a second conversation with Daniel, this time longer. We spoke about neutral things first. Work, cities we'd lived in, mutual preferences for quiet routines. He didn't try to claim me. He didn't use emotional language. He simply answered questions. "Yes, your mother and I met through a community volunteer event. Yes, I was told she was separating from your father at the time. No, I didn't know you were born." There was no dramatization, no rewriting of history to flatter himself. Just facts. I respected that. At one point, he paused and said, "I don't want to disrupt your life." "You're not," I said, and I meant it. The disruption had already happened decades ago. We agreed to meet in person. Neutral location, public cafe, no emotional theatrics. But before that meeting occurred, something else shifted at home. My mother showed up at my condo unannounced. She had never done that before. I opened the door, surprised but composed. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." She sat on my couch, hands folded tightly. "You've been different," she began. "I've been aware," I corrected softly. Her eyes flickered. There it was again, that recognition. "I don't know what you think you found," she said carefully, "but families survive because some things are left alone." That sentence confirmed everything. I didn't accuse her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked to my desk, opened the drawer, and placed the lab-certified paternity report on the coffee table between us. I didn't slide it toward her. I just let it exist there. The room became very quiet. She didn't touch the paper immediately. When she did, her hands trembled. Not violently, just enough to reveal the cost of holding something for too long. She read it once, closed her eyes. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. "When?" I asked. She didn't answer. Because there is no comfortable year to reveal a secret that large. There is only a delay, and delay compounds. The consequences had begun. Not because I confronted her, but because I removed myself from the structure that kept the secret stable. And once stability shifts, truth surfaces on its own. My mother didn't cry. That surprised me. She sat very still on my couch, the lab report resting on her lap, as if it were a fragile object that might shatter if she moved too quickly. "I was 26, she began quietly. "Your father and I were unstable. We were separating. I met Daniel during that time." She spoke carefully, not defensively, just chronologically. "It wasn't meant to last, and when I found out I was pregnant, your father had already decided he wanted to repair the marriage." Repair, another structural word. I told Daniel it wasn't his responsibility. I told him the baby was my husband's. I thought I was protecting everyone. "Everyone?" I asked gently. Her lips pressed together. "I believe stability mattered more than biology." That sentence held decades of justification inside it. "I never meant for you to feel different," she added. "But I did," I said. Not accusing, just factual. She looked at me then. Not as the steady daughter, not as the easy one, as someone whose internal map had just been redrawn. "I asked your father if he wanted to know for certain," she continued. "He said no, he said you were his, and that was enough." That landed differently. Not betrayal, not innocence. Choice. My father had chosen not to confirm, had chosen certainty of role over certainty of DNA. That was its own kind of love. But it was also its own kind of silence. "Did my siblings know?" I asked. Her hesitation was answered before she did. "Ethan suspected," she admitted. "He saw paperwork once when he was a teenager. We told him it was nothing." "And the others?" "Clara overheard an argument years ago. Marcus. I'm not sure how much he pieced together. The twins were too young. So I hadn't been imagining it. The jokes, the half-second pauses, the glances. Some of them had known enough to feel the outline of it. But no one had ever chosen to bring me into the truth. Not because they hated me, because confronting it would destabilize the entire narrative of our family. "You could have told me when I turned 18, I said quietly. "You could have told me when I moved out, when I got engaged, when Dad got sick." She closed her eyes. There was never a right moment. And that was the problem. When truth is postponed for comfort, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates pressure. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said. "I know," I replied. And I did. This wasn't a villain story. It was a fear story. Fear of collapse. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing the version of family that felt intact. But here's the part she hadn't calculated. Silence doesn't preserve connection. It distorts it. For 38 years, I had carried an unspoken difference without context. And context matters. "You don't have to forgive me today," she whispered. "I'm not angry," I said. That was true. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was finality, not the kind that destroys, the kind that closes a chapter. "You can't fix this by explaining it," I continued. "The only thing that fixes it is honesty moving forward." She nodded slowly, but we both understood something unspoken. The moment to introduce honesty gently had passed decades ago. Now it would land more heavily. The consequences weren't explosive. They were irreversible. We didn't tell my siblings immediately. My mother wanted time. Not to rewrite the story, just to breathe inside the new reality of it. I gave her 2 weeks, not as punishment, as a transition. During that time, I met Daniel in person. A quiet cafe halfway between our cities, neutral ground, afternoon light slanting through wide windows. When he stood to greet me, there was no dramatic recognition, no cinematic pause. Just a man studying a face that felt familiar in ways neither of us could fully articulate. "You look like my sister," he said softly. I didn't know whether to smile. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his life. Divorced once, no other children, career in environmental planning. He asked about mine without prying. There was no attempt to insert himself into my history. At one point, he said, "I don't want to take anything away from the man who raised you." You can't, I replied. That's not transferable. We both understood that biology explains the origin. It doesn't erase memory. When we parted, there were no promises, no dramatic next steps, just an agreement to stay in contact. Slowly, respectfully. Then came the family meeting. My mother insisted on hosting it at her house, the same living room where we had sorted photo albums weeks earlier. Everyone arrived thinking it was about estate logistics. Ethan brought a folder. Clara carried pastries. The twins came in laughing about something unrelated. Marcus noticed the tension first. "What's going on?" he asked. My mother looked at me. I nodded once. "Permission," she began. "There's something I should have told you years ago." The room stilled, she explained without embellishment. Timeline, separation, relationship, decision. No excuses, just sequence. When she finished, silence filled the space like a held breath. Ethan wasn't surprised. That much was visible. His jaw tightened, but his eyes didn't widen. Clara looked at me first, not at our mother. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. The twins exchanged confused glances. "So, Rowan isn't Dad's?" Lily asked quietly. "I am Dad's," I said calmly, "just not biologically." That distinction mattered to me. No one raised their voice. No one accused. The confrontation didn't ignite. It settled. Ethan spoke first. "I found a document once when I was 16, he admitted. I asked Mom. She said it was nothing." I met his eyes. "You could have asked me." He looked down. I didn't want to destabilize things. There it was again. Stability. As if truth were an earthquake instead of a foundation. Clara moved closer to me on the couch. "I never knew for sure," she said softly. "Just sensed something." Marcus exhaled. So that's what all the jokes were. The twins were quiet, absorbing, processing. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't recount every moment of subtle exclusion, because this wasn't about tallying harm. It was about recalibration. "I'm not leaving this family," I said evenly, "but I'm not carrying secrets for it anymore." That was the line. Clear, measured, non-negotiable. My mother nodded, tears finally forming but not falling. For the first time, the room felt honest. Not healed, not perfectly aligned, but real. And real is quieter than drama. It's been 8 months, long enough for the initial shock to dissolve, long enough for new patterns to form. I still attend Sunday dinners, but I no longer arrive early to prepare the table. If I come as a guest, not as infrastructure. That shift seems small from the outside. It isn't. Ethan speaks to me differently now. Not cautiously, not awkwardly, just directly. He asks for my opinion and waits for the full answer. Clara has stopped using phrases like, "You've always been different," as if difference needs softening. Marcus apologized once, briefly, sincerely, for the jokes. The twins asked questions openly about genetics, about choice, about identity. And my mother? She's quieter around me now, not in avoidance, but in awareness. She understands that I am no longer the silent stabilizer of unspoken things. We've had several conversations since that night, not dramatic ones, measured ones. She told me more about that year, how scared she was of losing her marriage, how certain she was that maintaining the appearance of unity would protect all of us. "I thought love was enough," she said. "It was," I answered, "just incomplete." That's the word I've settled on. Incomplete, not fraudulent, not fake, just missing context. I still call the man who raised me Dad. That hasn't changed. Grief has become more layered now. There's a second dimension to it, a quiet awareness that he chose not to know. That choice feels complicated, but it also feels intentional. He raised me without hesitation, without distinction, and in that way, biology never limited him. Daniel and I speak occasionally. Coffee every few weeks, long walks in public parks where conversations can breathe. There's no rush to define the relationship. He isn't trying to be Dad. He's trying to be present. That's enough. The most significant shift hasn't been external, it's internal. For most of my life, I believed my steadiness was something I offered to others. Now I understand it's something I own for myself. I don't over-explain anymore. I don't preemptively smooth tension that isn't mine to manage. If a family joke crosses a line, I say, "That doesn't work for me," calmly, and the room adjusts. Identity isn't just about DNA. It's about agency. The right to understand your own origin. The right to participate in the full story of your life. I am not the mysterious one anymore. I'm the informed one. And there's a difference. There's no bitterness in me, no desire to punish or expose. What I wanted was alignment, and alignment once achieved is quiet. I still carry my silver mechanical pencil, still analyze patterns for a living, but now when I look in the mirror, I don't search for resemblance. I recognize ownership. I'm Rowan Snyder, daughter by love, daughter by biology, sister in complex proportions, and fully myself. If you had told me a year ago that I would uncover something this foundational about my identity, I would have assumed it would break me. It didn't. What breaks people isn't the truth, it's the absence of it. For 38 years, I lived inside a version of my family that was loving, but incomplete. I wasn't abused, I wasn't rejected, I wasn't treated as an outsider in any obvious way. But I was subtly positioned as different, and difference without explanation creates distance. What I've learned is this: silence can protect, but it can also distort. My mother believed she was preserving stability. My father believed love was enough to erase biology. My siblings believed avoiding the question kept the peace. They weren't villains. They were afraid of disruption. But disruption is not the same thing as destruction. When the truth finally surfaced, it didn't shatter our family. It clarified it. The real power in this story wasn't the DNA result. It was the decision to stop carrying confusion quietly. It was choosing alignment over comfort. I didn't scream, I didn't expose, I didn't seek revenge. I documented, I verified, I spoke calmly, and that was enough. If you're watching this and you've ever felt slightly out of place in your own story, slightly misaligned, slightly other, I want you to know something. Your intuition deserves investigation. Not paranoia, not an accusation, just gentle, honest curiosity. Because identity is not something you inherit passively. It's something you're allowed to understand fully. Families are complicated. Love is complicated. Biology is complicated. But clarity doesn't have to be loud to be transformative. So I'll leave you with this. If discovering the full truth about your identity meant temporarily unsettling the people around you, would you still choose to know? I'm curious what you would do. Let me know in the comments.